We knew it was going to be hot because we put up the information for the show. And normally we just put the information up a little before the show to keep down any technical difficulties. But we decided to go ahead and put the beginning of this series up a couple of days in advance. And so we knew that would cause some serious issues. And it did. But this series that we're beginning today is the His Name is My Name Too, Black Communities Reparations Initiative Part 1. And so, for those of you that have not had a chance to read what the initiative is about, where you can go online to the show, and if you're just listening to the show and you're not able to, maybe open it up, maybe you're at work and you're just kind of listening to it with an earpiece or whatever, and you're not able to see what it says, we're going to go through it for you so that you understand what we're going to be dealing with and why it's causing so much controversy. This initiative will explore today's whites that are linked to the former white slave owners in America and determine once and for all which blacks were owned by which linked whites based on research same last names. For example, how do so many blacks get the same last name as white presidents? Arthur, Andrews, Adams, Buchanan, Bush, Clinton, Eisenhower, Fillmore, Ford, Grant, Garfield, Hoover, Hayes, Harding, Harrison, Johnson, Jefferson, Jackson, Kennedy, Lincoln, Madison, Monroe, Nixon, Polk, Pierce, Roosevelt, Reagan, Taft, Truman, Tyler, Taylor, Van Buren, Washington, etc. Or the same last name as white company owners and everyday whites. And then we'll go through some of the everyday names, last names that black people have. But let's start with the top. All right, how many black people do you know that have the last name Adams? Felicia Adams, Keith Adams, Fred Adams. And you talk about, just over the past 10 years or so, I have met so many black people with the last name Bush. Wanda Bush, and Tracy Bush, and Gregory Bush, and I was like, have you ever wondered how you got the same last name as George W. Bush or George, his father, George Bush? So you really want to know. And then his grandfather was a Bush. So did George Bush grandfather own a company that owned slaves? Did the Bush family own slaves, and therefore these names, Wilma, the great-great-grandparents, might have been Wilma or Harriet or whatever that white folks gave them previously. But when they are purchased by the Bush family, the last name of these people become Bush. Now, for those blacks that were sold to families or belonged to white families right before the so-called emancipation, when the emancipation occurred, each one of them at that time had their last slave owner last name. So you have some blacks that decide when you see the name Freeman or when you see the name, there's different Green and whatnot that people were able to say when they registered as newly freed slaves, what is your name? And they either had to say Harriet Green, which that would be the name that her last slave owners had given to her, or they would just come up with something like they're newly free, therefore they're now freemen. And so the black male would be, his first name, they call him, the white folks named him Charlie when he was born into slavery. And his last slave owner, he does not want to carry that name. So he would make up a name, and many of them chose the name Freeman. And because the black male chose the last name Freeman, a lot of the family members, the wives, the children, and whatnot, also signed up their name or to set their name to be Freeman. But you have, let's talk about some of the blacks with last name Clinton. You had black folks, I sent this out, and one of the people that contacted me was asking about people like Oscar Grant. Does that mean that Oscar Grant is his children now, his child is, a member of the Grant family from back in the day, slave owners? And so while Oscar Grant chose to go outside of the black community and get with a white Hispanic woman to have the mulatto child that is not actually black, that name of Grant will still carries on. And so this was the kind of thing that made it difficult for blacks to even track their family members, stuff like this. And so it used to be before the so-called emancipation that white slave owners were the reason that you had those different degrees of white blood in your children or in your grandchildren. But with the civil rights situation that occurred, and of course I talk about a lot, where civil rights blacks and even some of the founders of the Panthers were tricked into accepting whites as, so-called equal and trying to be equal with whites, even though blacks and whites were completely different species. And the civil rights blacks, many of them got with the daughters of white Jews or the lightest light-skinned person they could find. And so they were tending to do the same damage to the black bloodline that white slave owners had done in the past. And now blacks voluntarily dilute their black bloodline by going after white women, or black women dilute their bloodline by mating with white men. And so you had, when it comes to trying to figure this whole puzzle out, you have to think of it as, when you're doing your family tree, as a 10,000-piece puzzle. You have to see which part is connected to which part in order to get those edges. Those edges would be the oldest people in your family right now. And take them and make the edges. And as you start connecting their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, you'll start seeing whose parents are who and how are those parents connected to the next group of people. And then when it comes to ancestry, a lot of people try to just collect all of the pieces at once. But there is a system to creating an ancestry chart. And you have to go, systematically in order to keep from missing big, giant chunks. So ancestry charts are done backwards. as you know. So it's not enough to start at, 1,600 or 1,700 and try to work your way forward, because you are going to miss a lot of documentation that has been either hidden from you, destroyed, or misplaced, or whatever. So the best way to do a family chart, and we got a lot of Black civil rights organizations and Black reparations organizations that are going to be helping Black men, Black women, Black children do their family charts in preparation of this reparation initiative.